Hi everyone, and once again welcome to Joe Glass Comics. I'm Joe Glass, comics writer and creator of series such as The Pride, Acceptable Losses, The Miracles, Anglet Vipers, and a lot more which is just still not out yet, so plenty more to come from me. I'm going to be continuing today with my story of breaking into comics so that you can learn a bit more about how I did it, possibly might help you with your own journey into comics, and maybe just a few tips and tricks along the way. As the last episode was networking part 1, this will be networking part 2, which will be talking about how I continued networking to get to the position that I'm at now and how it helped to do what I do now. For this next bit, it's a little bit of a time jump, to be honest. At this stage in my comics making career, we had been exhibiting at Comic-Cons for a few years. Stiffs and The Pride were both quite a few issues in. As it was, things had actually kind of turned tables somewhat on the sort of fortunes of Stiffs and The Pride. While initially Stiffs was the most popular of the two books which we had on the table when we were exhibiting all together as a big group, it had got to a stage where things had slightly changed, and while Stiffs maintained, and still does to be honest, a very loyal and very ardent fan base, it wasn't increasing, it wasn't sort of getting bigger, and as such, like I say, we kind of all realised that we were going to have to focus on different things. But The Pride was actually doing really well. It had gone from being like this little book which we had on the table which would sell like lower numbers than Stiffs to suddenly being the big seller on the table. This point that I'm going to be talking about now, The Pride was about 3 issues in, I think, maybe 4. We had done at least 1 issue of The Pride Adventures, which had been set up to sort of fill the gap in the release schedule of the main series of The Pride. And yeah, so I had quite a few books, and it got to the point that we sort of had all sort of realized different sort of needs in the sort of comics making path that we were going. And as such, I started exhibiting by myself with just The Pride and my various copies of The Pride on the table, because as it was, that series was starting to take up too much space on the table between the pair of us. Similarly, we were getting to that stage where PJ and Gavin had their own sort of things they wanted to do with comics and started to go off on doing their own things and creating their own things. So, we're all still close, but we'd all sort of gone our separate ways in terms of the comics. Similarly, Drew had decided that comics wasn't for him. He decided that he loves comics, he's a big fan of comics, but comics making wasn't necessarily something that he wanted to continue doing. As such, Stiffs never really sort of saw complete completion. We just couldn't afford to keep it going. And as I say, we all had to go our separate ways. But at this point, like I say, for the context of the story, unfortunately there is a little bit of preamble, we had sort of got to the point where now I was exhibiting by myself with just The Pride. For the next stage of this little preamble, before I get into the next stage of networking proper, we have to look back at Kapow Comic Con. This was a Comic Con created by Mark Miller, which ran for just a couple of years, to be honest. I think the event in particular that I'm going to be talking about was at the second one in London. The whole idea of Kapow Comic Con was that it would bring that sort of feel of American Comic Cons to the UK. So you would have like a lot of international creators at the show. You would have a lot of the actual publishers themselves turning up in some form, whether it be from talent scouts to actual editors, or even in this case, editors-in-chief. This particular Kapow Comic Con, as I say, I think was the second year that it had run. They had Dan Didio was going, and also whoever was the person above him at the time, whose name is completely escaping me. I decided that I was going to go along, and a big part of that was around this time the New 52 was happening at DC. So this was a massive reboot of continuity where the whole line was being completely restarted with like new takes on the characters. And I remember at the time there was an interview, I can't remember if it was for The Advocate, it might have been for something like Rolling Stone or Hollywood Reporter, where Dan Didio had talked about the New 52. And one of the things which was happening was a lot of characters were being significantly changed from previous appearances. For example, there were characters who were like changing race, there were characters who were formerly like large, overweight people, or who were now super skinny and sexy. You suddenly had characters who were disabled, now fully abled again. So like it was kind of a lot of things massively changing. I remember in this particular interview, it was asked of him like, oh, will we see any straight characters come back as queer? And Didio's response to that question was to say that no, that was a line they felt they couldn't cross. And that bugged me. So like I went with the express intention of I'm going to ask a question at the panel, because one of the things with Kapow was they actually held American Comic-Con style panels, which at the time wasn't particularly common at UK Comic-Cons. So I went to this panel and Q&A comes up and I asked the question. I actually managed to get the microphone, I get to actually ask my question, and I asked Andy Dio, why was making a character LGBTQ a line which DC wouldn't cross, and why was that line there? To which he actually revealed that that was something that they had changed their opinion on, and that in fact there would be news about that coming very soon, and we could expect a character who was formerly a straight character coming out as a gay character in this new version of continuity. So yeah, I was sort of the kid that asked the question, as it were, and it was something which sort of led to the ball rolling on some big things which would lead to my networking, just because that question and the answer, because it was a case that Dan had jumped the gun a little bit. He should not have answered that as he did, as soon as he did, because at the time it looks like they might have been preparing some sort of media push for it, and like the guy who was also on the panel, who was above Dan Didio at the time, made a face of just like, oh my god, I can't believe you've just said that. So yeah, it was kind of one of those things which kind of got a little bit of an early reveal. I remember Rich Johnston, who at the time was just starting up Bleeding Cool, if I recall, came up to me and actually said that was a really good question, and like that was going to be actual news. And he was right. This was not just comics news. I started seeing it getting reported all over the place. Like mainstream media was covering how there was going to be a character coming out as gay in DC, blah blah blah. So I noticed that all of these people were covering that, but like what none of them seemed to be asking was like, why did I ask the question? Why was that question even asked? And so I sort of had approached Rich then, because at that time I'd met him previously at the first Kapow Comic Con, where he was an exhibitor, exhibiting his own comic books, and I just said like, I think there's a story there. I'm more than happy to write it, but like, why I felt the need to ask that question. And that was wound up being, I think, my first article for Bleeding Cool. It was around the same time that first article when it was posted that Bleeding Cool had run a competition for bringing people out to New York Comic Con. Why on earth did I say it like that? Bringing people out to New York Comic Con, where they would actually sort of be reporters, like field reporters for Bleeding Cool to cover the Comic Con. Essentially, they would, give you a ticket. And I missed the competition, so I'd like tweeted something like, just like, oh my god, I wish I'd taken part, blah, blah. And Rich actually reached out and said that, you know what, actually, we have a few extra tickets. Would you like one? So that was how I went to my first New York Comic Con, which was back in 2013. It's where I met a lot of my friends who would become part of Bleeding Cool, and started my sort of career as a Bleeding Cool comics reporter for a period of time. But the main reason that I wanted to go to New York Comic Con, aside from going to New York, like I'd only been to New York City at that point once before in my life, and it was a very brief visit. So like I knew I wanted to go again, and like I really wanted to do New York Comic Con. But there was also the aspect where I felt like, I want to make superhero comic books for like the big two, and work with any publisher really. But like these publishers are never coming to the UK. Like sure, you'll have creators coming to the UK, but you'd never find Marvel or DC coming to the UK. Like say there was that one time where CB Cebulski, the talent agent at the time, had come to Thought Bubble, and that was just once. Otherwise it was just 2000 AD, and I never particularly wanted to work with 2000 AD. I didn't really write the kind of comics which they wanted. So like it didn't really feel like that was a path for me. So it felt like to really move forward, even though at that point I had absolutely no idea how I was going to do it, I had to go to New York Comic Con. And to be honest, this is where the networking thing comes into it. I think that is the case for any creator. If you are wanting to work with the big publishers or Marvel, DC, anything like that, you need to kind of make yourself known and make your face recognizable to them. So to tell you a little bit about how I did that, I went to New York Comic Con in 2013, which was my first NYCC that I ever went to. I brought a bunch of copies of my book, which I was going to give out for free, basically to editors, to creators, to just people I like and just sort of could meet. along with business cards and things like that, to essentially just be like, hey, there's a comic book I'm making, I hope you can check it out, please like it, and use contact details if you do want to get in touch. This was easier to do at the time. Since that day, obviously, Trump came in, changes in rules, in what you could exhibit and take with you and all this. Back in the day, you could take a few comic books which you were going to give out at a Comic-Con, and it wasn't going to be a tax problem or any kind of sort of problem, really. But now, yeah, it's very likely you would get stopped at customs, so it's not something you can easily do so much anymore. And really, a lot of editors these days don't necessarily take a physical copy anymore. They would actually rather just maybe exchange emails and then like send things via email. As I say, it is worth pointing out, if it comes to that, it is never a case of you can get their email and you can send them unsolicited scripts. No, never send a script. You are to send a comic which you have completed, not something which is like in production or like which is just the script story for it. It has to be a comic which is out there. It's a whole legal thing. If you send them a script, they ain't gonna look at it. There's a chance then that you'll also sort of shoot yourself in the foot because they'll think that you're not professional and they're not gonna read anything about you again. So yeah, seriously, if you get to that stage where you can communicate with editors, where you can send them stuff, or you find out their email and you want to send them stuff, send comics you've already made. Don't send them your ideas. Don't send them your scripts. They cannot look at them. So anyway, that's kind of what I did at NYCC 2013. I was just taking stuff with me. I didn't actually wind up going back until NYCC 2015, where I actually wound up exhibiting as well, back again when that was still really a possibility. And a lot of the time, like I said, I spent a lot of time just taking books around and my business cards around and just trying to meet people. Now, I will say that I was not doing it the right way either, though. Personally, I sort of flubbed up a little bit. I always find it really easy to talk to fellow creators, but I don't find it really easy to talk to editors for some reason, and that's a personal thing which I really need to get over. But what I was finding that I was doing was I was going to creators where I lived and like giving them copies of my comics and stuff, and just being like, I really hope you enjoy it, like a real big fan of your work. And while that is very fulfilling in a sense of personally fulfilling, that you get to know these creators, these people who you idolized or your heroes or something like that, and maybe they'll tell you your work's great or give you helpful advice, or maybe even they will help out with trying to introduce you to people. At the end of the day though, it's not particularly a good step in fulfilling your career path, in the sense that they're not really going to be in a position where they can help you get a gig or they can help you sort of get to work on something. Most of the time, the most they can really do is just put your name out there and just sort of suggest to an editor, hey, there's this guy, I've read some of his stuff, he's interesting, you might want to check him out. The people you really want to be meeting are, like, say, the talent scouts and the actual editors, to possibly, because they're the ones who will actually be able to potentially get you on a roll. That's not to say that you should be meeting these people and doing these things to use them for that. Like, if you were trying to build a relationship, whether it be with another creator or even a creator who is above you and you idolize or whatever, you shouldn't be looking at them as a stepping stone. At the end of the day, these are people too. Like, the best thing that you can have for yourself in this industry is to like cultivate relationships, and that's what networking is a lot of the time. It's cultivating relationships. To give a great example of how that happened and how that worked for me and ultimately led to perhaps one of the biggest moments in my life, at 2013 I actually met some of the people behind Comixology. Now, Comixology at that time was, I think, just setting up Comixology Submit, which was part of their platform for digital comics, where independent creators could submit their comics to be on the Comixology platform. I had met them at a socializing event at New York Comic Con 2013. I met them through Rich Johnston, who at that time was quite friendly with some of them. So like say, I began making friends with a lot of the people who are still there at Comixology now. Some aren't, some are. So like, I was just talking and like telling them about my book and that I was going to be putting it on Submit and everything. And they kept an eye out for it, because then like a year later, I was exhibiting, or rather going, to cover San Diego Comic Con, my first ever SDCC. And it was a case of like, they found out I was heading out, so they asked did I want to be on a panel. So not only was it my first San Diego Comic Con, I was on my first panel. And my first panel was at San Diego Comic-Con, and it was to talk about the Comixology Submit experience and how that worked for me. So I was on a panel with people like Jimmy Palmiotti and Ross Ritchie, so like, it was a big deal. Obviously later, Comixology would also introduce Comixology Originals, which was where they started making original content for the Comixology platform. And at this point, like, Pride was all finished for its first season. I knew I wanted to make more, and I saw the opportunity to possibly, make more with Comixology with their help, because I knew I was financially going to need help to keep it going. I didn't want to do one story arc over 6 years like I had done with the first story arc of the Pride. So it was a case of just having to approach them and being like, hey, I kind of got this idea, I'd like to swing it by you, can I do that? And I would only have been able to do that because I met these people and like had made those connections, and was able to say, look, I know I'm not a big name, I'm not the kind of people that you're possibly going to be reaching out to work on these projects, but like, I've got an idea and I'd love to swing it by you. And because they knew who I was, because they were able to put a face to the name, and because they knew my content, and also that my content had done pretty well on Comixology Submit, so they knew that, yeah, okay, this is going to be worthwhile. But I honestly feel like I got there because I made connections. I was not an unknown. I was not just, even a faceless creator of this particular project. As much as your project should do the most of your legwork, speaking about your capability and who you are, it helps when people know the person behind it as well. So that's another reason why networking is hugely important. It's very easy for you to show an editor a really fantastic comic book, which is really well made, but that editor maybe doesn't know from that what it's going to be like to work with you. Nor are they going to be able to tell what kind of likes and interests you have, which might say that, oh, I've got this thing which they might actually be good for. You only get that by cultivating relationships in the comic book industry. There is an element of absolutely everything you do needs to be through actual proving that you can do it, but certainly there is an element of you need to also make yourself known. This similarly adds into what I said on the last episode, where you've got to be a good person. You cannot be a complete asshole, because that absolutely, will bite you in the ass. You could show an editor a book which is really good, which really looks fantastic, but if they know that you're a complete asshole, they're not going to want to hire you. When you are networking, when you are trying to meet people, don't be networking and cultivating these relationships from a purely I only want to know you for how much you can help me point of view. There are comic creators out there who have done that, and people know them quite well within the industry. I'm not going to name and shame, but people can tell when that is what you're after. At the end of the day, networking is hugely important, but the best part of why that's important is to show who you are as a creator and as a person. And if all you are showing is that you only value people for what they can do for you, then that will speak an awful lot and will actually cultivate whether people do want to help you. Ultimately, networking is the most important tool in working your way up this industry if you are particularly looking for working with publishers, working with editors, working on these bigger projects, etc. But it is absolutely 10 times more vital to be a good person and to be as equally willing to help your peers and your colleagues as you are someone trying to seek help. A lot of it will be a case that no one really knows how this industry works, in the sense of what's the way in, who's going to work this time, who can help me, what can help me, what do I need to do. No one gives you a step-by-step guide, and no step-by-step guide would really be 100% accurate. Not even this story of my personal breaking into comics is probably going to 100% work if you tried to mimic it exactly. At the end of the day, you each have to find your own path, and the only way to do that is to find people who will be able to help you along that path, but not in a sense of that is their only value. They will actually be the closest friends, the closest allies that you can possibly have when working through this journey into making comics. In that regard, networking, yes, is hugely important, and there's certainly ways to do it. But you absolutely have to be also cultivating a relationship as a person who understands that these people are people. They're not just tools to get you what you want or where you need to be. Do reach out to people in the industry who are with you and who are helping you or at your level or even just above you, whatever step on this ladder in the industry they're at. When you treat these people as people, that is when you are really going to find that you're going to get all the help you could possibly need and wonderful things can come out of it. So the main thing I would say is, if these are your particular interests in working through the industry and you particularly want to work with the big publishers or the big two, or these are the kind of stories you want to tell, aside from what we've already covered, that you have to be making comics yourself anyway. You have to be making your own books and putting them out there and exhibiting and doing Comic Cons and doing all that. Aside from that, in terms of networking, you really probably are going to want to go to some of the bigger Comic Cons. If you are based in America, there are also other options. You can actually get internships at Marvel, DC, any of the other publishers, and that can be a good way to making yourself known, learning about the actual act of making comics, to really help you to make comic books. Like, if you were at that stage where you're early on and you haven't made any of your own yet, then, and you can afford to do it, because, like, let's face it, an internship is not something which everyone can do. If you can do it, maybe see if you can get one of these internships. You can learn so much just from being around the production of comics about what goes into making comics, and that will help you to start making your own. So, like, networking, there are various different routes you can go, but I would say the best thing you need to do is to make yourself known, to cultivate friendships with your peers and with the other people going through the same journey as you, and yes, to make sure that people know the person behind the work so that they can get an idea of what you are capable of, what you're interested in, and what kind of work you might actually be good for, so that they can see you in the future. Likewise, when you do come to meeting editors and things, remember that they are not just there to be a tool to uplift you. They are people too, they have their own interests. Cultivate relationships and you will actually get a lot further. Similarly, when you get to that stage where you can send people ideas, send people pitches, whatever, that's awesome. Don't send them unsolicited stuff. If they ask for a pitch, great. If it's a case of you've just been given this email so that you could send them some of your work so they can have an idea of who you are, don't just suddenly inundate them with unmade scripts or anything like that. Just send them comics which are finished and complete and which are out there. That way they will be able to take a look at what you are capable of doing, and that will really sell yourself. Anyway, that's it for this particular entry into the Breaking Into Comics journey. I'm probably going to take a little bit of a break on this particular series on the channel because, like I said, I think I need to work out what the next steps were, both in my journey and also worth telling you about and what's going to be useful to you. So yeah, I'm going to take a little break, sort of formulate what the next few episodes are. Maybe if there are any episodes, maybe I've kind of exhausted where I am right now, but like I said, I'll work it out and I'll sort of let everyone know. Main places you can go to find out what I'm doing would be my newsletter. You can sign up to that on my website, where there is a link in the description below. Likewise, I would love to hear what kind of things you'd like to learn about. Seriously, let me know, put some comments in the comments below and let me know what kind of things you want to know about the journey into comics books that I've had, about the idea of breaking into comic books, what kind of things do you want to achieve out of it. So yeah, let me know in the comments below. This might help me work out what the next few episodes are going to be. Please like the video and please subscribe to the channel to never miss a single thing. Yeah, so hi, thanks again for checking out the Joe Glass Comics channel. I'll hopefully see you soon. And yeah, great speaking with you. See you again.